If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy. Download and subscribe at BeBullish.com.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to another episode of The Left versus the Right. And we have with us returning, we don't know how many times he's actually done this program, but back by popular demand, we have Judge Richard Weinberg with us. And, we're two Democrats who try to be fair. And sometimes we have the left position and sometimes we have the right position. And but on those rare occasions where we disagree, that is the left versus the right. Your Honor, thanks for joining me again.
It's an honor and a privilege, Governor. I always have fun doing this with you.
So I want to talk to you about a few things that happened during the week that just caught my attention. And I want to try to filter this through left versus the right, just to common sense. So, for instance, just earlier in the week, the Justice Department visited the IRS. Now, I always thought it was the IRS you should be afraid of when they knock on the door, but in this case, it was the Justice Department, and they want to look at the records of high worth people to see where they're donating and whether or not they're donating to causes that are dangerous. And, they keep talking about what happened to Charlie Kirk. And don't get me wrong, what happened to Charlie Kirk was a horrible, miserable tragedy. And just it took away a family, took away a person, and took away a lot of people who supported him. But they're still talking about these copycats, but there was never any finding that the killer was anything more than a psychopath. But back to the real main point, I don't know what I think of a society where the taxpayers get investigated by the government. It's starting to make me think a little too much of some other countries, none of which I would want to live in. What do you think?
I think it's a very complicated question. And the reason it's a complicated question is because we have to always worry about national security and protecting our people against bad actors who would bring us down. My favorite Supreme Court Justice, United States Supreme Court Justice, was Robert Jackson, who had been Attorney General of the United States, Justice Supreme Court, and the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials for the United States. And he famously said, the United States Constitution is not a suicide pact. And that's the dilemma we find ourselves in. When I was at NYU Law School, the Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Widgery, came and spoke. And he said something that was very interesting, which stuck with me all these many, many years, which is, he said, the left will tell you, the liberals tell you, that you cannot have security without liberty. He says, but I will tell you, you cannot have liberty without security. And that's the delicate balance. So the United States Constitution is not a suicide pact. We have to make sure we have national security. The question becomes, when you have governmental power through investigative agencies and prosecutorial agencies, those powers can be abused. And so what do I think about that? That's what I think about that. So you need to have people of good faith who are responsible for doing the right thing to protect the country with that delicate balance that not infringe upon fundamental liberties, to intimidate them so that there's not reasonable protected dissent. That's the problem. They're not easy solutions to that dilemma, Governor, and that's my problem with it. Notably, during the Obama administration, there's a woman named Lois Lerner who ran a special unit in the IRS, and what they did is they trafficked in intimidating and censoring political opponents of the left, the Obama administration, and literally stopped them from functioning by harassing them, taking away their tax protections, and that was a very dangerous thing. And when she was called upon to testify about what she had done, she first read this long statement, and then when I tried to ask questions, she said, "I'm asserting the Fifth Amendment." Well, respectfully to Ms. Lerner, the answer is once you make the statement, you've waived your right to the Fifth Amendment. Of course, as you and I both know as former prosecutors and as lawyers, you've opened the door, correctly stated. But that was covered up. The real truth about what the Obama administration did in intimidating political opponents has never really come out. The Biden administration did the same thing. The Biden administration used lawfare against Trump and against Republicans and conservatives. So we're confronted with the following dilemma. The Justice Department, now that's led by Attorney General appointed by Trump, has indicted a couple of political opponents of President Trump, one being Comey, former FBI director, the other being Tish James, someone we both know well, the Attorney General of the State of New York. And just the other day, they indicted Ambassador John Bolton. And my thoughts about this is that if I didn't like lawfare when it was being used against Trump and Republicans and conservatives, I don't like it when it's being used against the left. So that was a long answer to what I think is a simple question stated, but not so easily answered.
Well, let me ask you this to make my point. I was not pleased with the indictment of John Bolton. Now, by the way, nor was I. Yes. And I used to interview him 2 or 3 times a week back in, I'd say 2013, 2014. I had a radio show here in New York. And he was always quite cooperative. And he always said something that made you think. You didn't agree with it all the time. And then as a human being, he was a very accessible guest and really, a person who I send my prayers and wishes that this is not true. However, to your point, clearly a lot of investigating went into what he was doing before they brought the indictment. They didn't just bring it.
And by the way, that was commenced under the Biden administration.
Yes, which is really kind of interesting that they would do that. Now, I've been aware that the president has been hot and cold, mostly cold, about Bolton going back to his last administration, but what I'm kind of saying is that it seems to me that some of these indictments right now are somewhat of an overreach. That's what I think.
Well, let's do it in reverse order. Okay, let's take Bolton. Like you, I've had the pleasure of spending time with Ambassador Bolton. I've had one-on-one conversations with him, in corridors and on elevators, in lobbies, and had very interesting conversations with him. I've always been a fan of John Bolton. I think he understood the Iranian threat and the failures of Obama and Biden in dealing with that threat, minimizing it, and sending bags and bags and bags of cash to them to try to buy them off, to appease them. I thought the Iran deal was one of the great travesties of all time, which funded the terrorism network that we're still having to deal with
And
today.
just to refocus just for a second from what we're actually talking about, I don't know what it was about Iran that made President Obama so interested with working with them, appeasing them, paying them, doing everything you would do. If he did half of what he did for Iran, for some of these other countries that it seemed to bother him, he would have been in a lot better shape than he turned out to be. But you're absolutely right. So I'm asking you, what was it about Iran that made him think that this was this genius
because
move?
he wanted to because what he wanted to do is reconstitute the world order and have more of a balance. He thought that the United States was too pro-Israel, and he wanted to put a balance and to the larger population and the larger number of nation states in the Muslim community, and that's what he was about. So he started off his presidency by doing an apology tour through the Middle East and through Europe. So I never thought very much, frankly, of Obama. I always thought, the Hopi and change nonsense.
That's almost like you're having a boxing match, and you go out and you stand there. Your opponent comes out and gets down on his knees.
I mean,
and they haven't rung the bell yet.
I thought it was awful. I agree with that. That's a good way of thinking about it. I thought he was a terrible president, and yet a lot of people think he was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. The thing about going back to Bolton is Bolton understood the threat of Islamist terrorism, about the desire for hegemony over other peoples at the point of a sword. Whether it was, the Jews were the first ones up, but if you look at what radical Islamists do, they kill Christians as much as they kill Jews. They kill any religion that's not compliant with their worldview. They kill other Muslims who are not compliant with the way they believe the law should be. And the law, by the way, is all based on both political and religious tracks, and there's no tolerance for diversity of thought or of action of religious practices. And that's very, very dangerous. Bolton understood that. He understood the threat of Iran, and he was pushing the envelope with Trump. And I think he was pushing Trump more than Trump wanted to be pushed.
Yes, and I think that was part of it. And sometimes with the president, it might be a good idea, but he would rather think of it. But Bolton was maybe a little ahead of him, and it made him uncomfortable.
But so going back to the larger issue, what weaponization of the criminal justice system, the investigative function, the prosecutorial function, judicial proceedings, all of that is very, very dangerous because that leads to tyranny and oppression of dissident views. People do have First Amendment rights. They should be exercised, but they should be exercised responsibly and respectfully. It's not a First Amendment protection to seize Columbia University, your alma mater, and block other students from getting into class. Yes, you did.
Oh.
Yes, I did.
It's a senior moment that I have sometimes.
In those days, it was a great school. Now I'm not so sure. So the problem is you can't allow people to take over Grand Central Station, the Port Authority, the bridges and the tunnels, and block other people from living their lives and using force to intimidate and to harass. That's a violation of federal civil rights law.
Right. I agree.
You can't trespass. You can't use physical violence, intimidation.
But how much foresighted would it have been, in your opinion, if in trying not to let people with a whole lot of money start funding terrorist groups, violent groups, groups that are antagonistic to the principles that this country stands for, why would they say that right in the beginning when they don't have any particular case or issue or information about anyone? Now, President Trump has claimed that a few people that he doesn't like should be in prison, but he's never claimed what it is that they violated to get them in prison. And I'm with you. But I fear that sometimes this type of conduct gets out of control. It certainly did in the Obama administration.
Well, let's be
and would have in the Biden administration.
The Biden administration
had he been actually in charge.
Whoever was in charge of the Biden administration, the FBI and the Justice Department, whoever those bad actors were,
right,
they totally abused those processes. They abused the investigative process, they abused the prosecutorial process, and they abused the judicial process. So when these people, give you the shibboleths and the self-congratulatory righteousness that they want to protect democracy, they're the ones who are the greatest threat to democracy. That doesn't mean that Trump should do it, and I don't want Trump to do it, but I don't want us to fall under disintegration in our society because we don't fight our internal and external enemies.
Right.
And that's the delicate balance.
To be fair to the president, a lot of times when he says these things, it's like the id of his personality that, reflects these points of view. But there's no indication that he himself has ever started directing people in the administration.
I think that's fair. And let me say this to you about that, as Richard Nixon said. He famously, at some campaign rally, started a chant talking about Hillary Clinton in the first campaign, the 2016 campaign against Hillary. Said, lock her up, and the whole audience go chanting, lock her up. But yet, when he became the president, he was as benign as possibly could be with the Clintons.
I think that it must be said that President Trump reads the moment as well as any political person, business leader, education specialist that I've known. He just has a knack for that kind of thing. And really, when you filter out the back and forth about him and how he does things, but that is an uncanny resource for an individual to have.
I mean, he's remarkable in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean I agree with everything he says and everything he does.
You don't agree with everything he says?
No, not at all.
I think that's appalling.
Well, listen, I'm not. Listen, I am like you. You and I, Governor of the House Democrats.
Yes,
we are the moderate, centrist, common sense Democrats.
I'm just glad they still let us sit in the House.
Well, let's be clear. Ideology is a dangerous thing when it's seized by true believers who have no tolerance for any diverse thought and won't respond intelligently and rationally to critiques. That's a dangerous thing. True believers are very dangerous. Beria, who is the head of the secret police for Stalin, famously said, "Show me the man, I'll show you the crime." It means they're going to unleash all those forces to bury somebody with trumped-up charges. Forgive the pun. Trumped-up charges.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not trying to aggrandize myself by saying this, but I governed scared all the time. As governor, even more so, but also as minority leader of the Senate, even as chair of the party in the state, because I always thought that when you went into that type of service or you're elevated to the level that I was at a certain point, you really owe it to yourself to separate your own personal feelings and judgments about other people, because you can really get into a situation where you just think you can do anything you want to do. And I've seen people at the legislative level, the assembly level, and the state Senate do that. And I don't know why they think they have so much power that they can't be caught, and they usually are. Now, we're caught because we're up against the break. We're with the Right Honor, His Excellency, Richard Weinberg, and we're having a good time. We're going to listen to a few commercial messages and see what our sponsors would like to say and join you back in a couple of minutes. Thanks for listening to The Left and the Right. I'm David Paterson.
The Left versus the Right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Left versus the Right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back on The Left versus the Right, and I'm so sorry you all missed the commercial period because Judge Weinberg suggested that he has an interesting thought. Now, he thinks it's interesting, but we're going to let him share it with all of us to see if we think it's interesting.
And the good news is I even remember what I was going to say, which I'm very proud to say I'm still capable of remembering what I think.
Yes.
So there was a judge, United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which is New York and Connecticut and Vermont, which is one of the leading United States courts of appeal. His name was Jerome Frank.
Sure.
And Judge Frank previously had been chairman of the Security and Exchange Commission when he was appointed to the federal bench. And what Judge Frank did, and by the way, he's another one of my heroes, it's Justice Jackson, who I referenced earlier. Jerome Frank was another one. And Jerome Frank, when he was appointed to the bench and he was confirmed, he went into psychoanalysis. Why did he do that? To your point, he wanted to divorce himself as much as humanly possible against human prejudice and bias. He understood that it was an awesome responsibility to be a judge, and he was going to deal with cases involving people's freedom, liberties, their lives, their property, their rights. He wanted to make sure he was doing the right thing and not being biased in any way. Now, when I became a judge, I did not go into psychoanalysis because they would never let me in. But they have barriers to entry on that.
Right.
But I always understood what Jerome Frank did, and I was always very conscious of it. So every time I go into my courtroom and sit there and judge my fellow human beings, I would always try to do the right thing, which is deal with the facts and the law as objectively as I could without passion or prejudice, anger, or emotion, just trying to make sure that people who came before me were treated fairly and responsibly. And the stand I always had is, if one of my children was before a court, how would I want that child to be treated? And that was my mantra to myself, and that's what I always try to do. And that's what you have to do. You have to have a moral compass. You have to not allow ideology or political agendas mar fairness, which is very interesting because it takes you to my third hero, was Welsh, who was the chief counsel at the Army McCarthy hearings. And he most famously said, when challenging, he was the chief counsel of the Army McCarthy hearings, and McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin, was a right-wing zealot who was accusing everybody of being a communist if they didn't agree with him, and he was making up numbers. He'd say there are 57 communists in the State Department.
Right.
He just made it up.
He actually said that. Yeah.
And of course, that was undoing, because when he started doing the due diligence, he couldn't establish that. He couldn't show that even close. And that unraveled him as a political figure, as well as his agenda, which was to confront communism. Not that confronting communism is a bad thing, but you have to do it responsibly. So Welsh confronted McCarthy at the hearings, and Welsh said, "At long last, sir, have you no decency?" And those words have always stuck with me all these many years later. At long last, sir, have you no decency? Because what was happening was McCarthy was defaming people because they were political opponents. And that's why the combination of those people, Justice Jackson, Judge Frank, Welsh as chief counsel to McCarthy hearings, the Army McCarthy hearings, always stayed with me all these many years because they were just trying to do the right thing.
Well, in all seriousness, You shared this with me about 3 weeks ago. We were just sitting, waiting to start the weekday 5 o'clock show with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby.
Katz and Cosby.
And I was moved by what you said. And now here I am. As soon as you started, I knew where you were going, but I'm moved by it again. And that's what really, the acclaim that you yourself have received for being fair, for being honest, and then, when called upon, giving your own opinions about things. So I want to ask you about another thing. This happened.
I'm your witness, Governor.
Yes, this happened this past Thursday, and it was that President Trump struck down the Gateway Project, which is not going over well in mid-New Jersey and particularly in South Jersey. It's not going over well in New York because these tunnels and highways connect the whole country. And this is what Governor Hochul pointed out in a press conference Thursday night. And interestingly enough, and this is just a side issue, this could become a problem for Jack Ciattarelli, who was the prohibitive favorite to become the governor of New Jersey. He obviously supported the project, but when the decision came down, he really, when talking to the press, didn't seem to indicate what he was going to do one way or the other.
Who's that, Trump or Ciattarelli?
Ciattarelli.
Right.
And that gave his opponent, Mikey Sherrill, the chance to blast him for it, which could have gone either way, depending on, which one of them was, in position to win that race. But the issue that I think is consuming too much of our time are the reprisals going to different states or different areas of the country, whatever, that, are not considered to be in synchronicity with the president. And look, the president can't help the fact that he has feelings. He can't help the fact that there are people he likes better than others. But in this particular case, he may lose a state to a Democrat over this action. I wonder how you thought about that.
Well, I think it's very well said. Going back to my favorite line, let me say this about that.
Agnew? No, Nixon. Sorry.
Yeah, Nixon. So it's very simple. That's political malpractice.
Right.
It's political malpractice because Ciattarelli, who we both know, is a very fine gentleman, would be an excellent governor, and is in a toss-up race against the Democratic Congresswoman who has endorsed Mondami, who's another discussion, which we can probably get to. And so my view is Ciattarelli is by far the better choice to be governor. You've had a failed administration of Murphy in New Jersey. The escalating energy prices are a disaster. Their obsession with this climate change nonsense.
I know that recently the polls have showed her catching up a little bit, but I had thought...
I think they're in the margin of error.
That he was... I thought he was a little more than a margin of error. I thought he was going to win.
Well, listen, I hope he does win. And I'd say that as the House Democrat. I hope Ciattarelli, the Republican, wins. Because the government of New Jersey under Democratic regimes has been awful. And they're overtaxed, they're overregulated. They have this obsession with climate change, which means they're not going to have an infrastructure to give energy, and runs risk of not having heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summer and fueling the technology that you need for an industrial society. This is very dangerous. So I think it is malpractice on Trump's part. Now, what I would say about that is I understand Trump's frustration because have these local powers, whether they're mayors or the councils or state legislatures or governors, who are trying to block him at every turn with the sanctuary city nonsense, which is unconstitutional, as a violation of law. There's no such thing constitutionally, as you know, as a sanctuary city. The Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution makes it very, very clear that federal immigration policy trumps the ability of a city, a county, a town, a state to say, no, we're not going to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. So I understand Trump's frustration. And so when he tries to hold back the cash flowing to these places, these jurisdictions, as a punishment to try to get them to move in his direction, I understand that. I would just hope he would be more circumspect in how he does it and see what he can do. There's certain things you can cut back on, theoretically, but you don't do something that's a hot potato like this Gateway project, which is needed both by New Jersey and by New York.
And in that realm, just the politics for a second, not what's right and wrong. But why wouldn't he have waited
until after the election?
Yeah. Why wouldn't he do that?
Because Donald Trump, and this is very funny for me to say this, it even sounds funny when I say it to myself. For a guy who's run for the presidency several times, has done very well in each of the elections, has got himself elected twice, came very close to being reelected 5 years ago in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
But he's guilty of political malpractice often. So, for example, in the 2020 election, he needed to win at least one of the two Georgia Senate seats in the special election when both Senate seats were up. Now, why did I say do you need that? Because having been the general counsel of New York City Council, having been the chief counsel, the speaker of that body, I understood the power of a legislature to do legislative investigation oversight and to deal with going after the executive. And in the federal system, they can impeach.
Yes, they can.
And I understood that. And I kept saying to people who would listen to me, random people I'd walk down the street and mutter to, I would say, he's making a terrible mistake. He has to win one of those two seats. But he discouraged his own voters. I kept yelling about it was a fixed election, it was a fraud. And so what happened was he discouraged his own voters in Georgia from coming out. The net result was they lost both those seats, which then led to a situation where he had to go on trial before the United States Senate.
And where he additionally was mouthing that before the vote even came in.
No, you don't do it. You just listen. This is the problem, and you appreciate this because you've been like me. You've been an agent, and you've been a principal. And it's much easier being the principal because if you make the mistake, you live with it. When you're the agent, you can give advice. But if your principal won't listen, you're at a loss because it's their decision. So my mantra to myself is I tell when I'm in the business of being an agent, I give the principal the advice they need to hear, not what they want to hear. You need to have somebody in the room who will say to the principal, you cannot go there. It's bad politics. It's bad public relations. It raises ethical questions. It may be beyond the scope of your authority. It may be illegal under a statute. It may be unconstitutional. Somebody has to have the intellectual honesty and the moral courage to tell the principal, do not go there, you're wrong. And if you don't do that, you have no business holding the job of being a senior advisor to a principal.
I had a staff member when I was governor who got into some trouble. It wasn't criminal, but it was trouble. And we had a very good working relationship, not unlike your relationship with Peter Vallone when he was the Speaker of the City Council. And I was trying to find a way to make it clear that this person recognized what they'd done and they were trying to seek redress and that kind of thing. And then a friend of mine came to see me and said, listen, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but he's got to go. Because if you let him stay, you've lowered the standard. Because, good and well, if it was 98% of the rest of if one of them did it, that you would let them go, you have to let him go. And I did. And it was painful. And, I found some ways that he could help outside of the administration. But sometimes you've just got to do it. And it all goes back to what you just said, that I wish more people in the field would listen to. And that is that you can't make special provisions for someone that could wreck your entire administration. And I think that was a lesson that I learned early, such that I didn't tolerate it anymore.
That's very important. That's very important. When you have this sacred responsibility as a governor, as a judge, or leader of the legislature, to do the right thing.
Well, right now I'm going to do the right thing because we are going to go and have a couple more messages from our sponsors and announcements about other programs on the station. And then we'll be back with the left versus the right. And at some point, the left and right will be versus each other. But so far, it hasn't happened today. Maybe in the last segment, the judge will throw a table at me or something, and we'll get things really moving around here. We'll be right back.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back for the final version of our program, our final time together, myself and Judge Richard Weinberg. Hope you're enjoying the program, and we're really enjoying that you're listening to it. And I have one last issue I want to bring up with you. And this is another administration issue to a certain degree. And it has to do with another incident that occurred on Thursday. No, it occurred Wednesday afternoon. And it was that the administration of the Pentagon informed the press corps that they were now going to use a different method of issuing information to people through the media. And they had this real kind of strong statement that if you violated any of it, you wouldn't be allowed in the press room. It was apparently so anathema to the wishes of the media individuals that all of them, except one, signed a statement opposing it. There was one called One Network Services, and the one is OANN. They're the only ones that agreed to participate. And I guess because we don't know who they are, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But it was notable that Fox signed the protest, and Newsmax did as well, which I kind of commend them because they're both very strong supporters of the president. They don't want to do anything to hurt the president, but I think they felt that this encroached on the freedom of the press. And just wanted to get your take on it.
I don't know the substance of what they changed. I don't know what the rules were in the first instance. I don't know what it was changed to. So it's hard for me to opine whether or not the change somehow compromised press freedom or not. I gather from what you're saying, Governor, that they viewed this as an impingement on their press freedoms under the First Amendment.
Right. From what I read, their angst over this issue came from what they saw as the administration of the Pentagon creating a barrier that they could not go through. So in other words, you could say they were doing a great job. You could say they were doing a good job. If you said things haven't been going that well lately, that would be out. And in other words, that was part of the
So in other words, so they were trying to limit their ability to make an analysis and saying, this was a good decision, this was a bad decision, this decision was over the line, this was within the line.
Right.
Well, I have a problem with that, I must say. I don't know that that's a good idea. I don't think the First Amendment is one of our most cherished freedoms. And the freedom of press is very, very important. Freedom of press, by the way, is not for the press, qua press. It's for the protection of our constitutional republic. And a lot of journalists seem to have forgotten that. And the problem that the Secretary of, what they call him this week, the Secretary of War as opposed to Secretary of Defense.
Oh, they're right.
The problem is that he's responding to a political phenomena, a public relations phenomenon, where there's been a hostile press to the Trump administration. And again, that's why you have to be very, very careful about how you act and how you react. So if he overstepped his bounds, and the Pentagon overstepped their bounds, that's a mistake. Doesn't speak well of them. Needs to, again, somebody has to say, slow down, don't rush into this. Maybe there's another way of accomplishing a result. But your job as a government official is to do your job. The press's job is to be objective and fair in giving positive or negative feedback.
Right.
And that's how the system is supposed to work.
And my feeling, Your Honor, is that this happened 2 or 3 days ago. By the beginning of next week, I think they might address this issue again and maybe try to clean it up to a certain degree, because apparently they were getting some reaction, not just from the Democrats, but from both sides, who obviously respect the media as much as, I always tried to respect the media. What I didn't try to do was limit my language about how I felt about them when they weren't around.
Well, that's the balance. Listen, if you go into the business of government, you're going to be criticized. You're going to be criticized by the political opposition. You're going to be criticized by commentators who have a certain point of view. Sometimes the criticism is fair. Sometimes it's just partisan and biased. But when you go into that world, you have to toughen yourself up and you deal with the criticisms. I have no problem with taking criticism. And if I'm criticized and I think it's wrongfully done, I have no problem speaking back. You know, as a judge, though, as opposed to when I was at City Hall, as a judge, you're really not allowed to do that. Your job as a judge is not to go counterpoint with the press or against lawyers who write articles who are quoted against you. It's an obligation of the organized bar to speak up and defend the integrity of judges, and not to allow them to be defamed and ridiculed.
And not for the individual judge to take on that role himself.
That's right. And a lot of judges
That's a very good point.
And a lot of judges forget about that. It's part of the ethical guidelines that judges live under. I want to raise something with you, because last night with Rita Cosby, we co-hosted a show which was kind of a play-by-play of the debates for the mayoralty here in New York City. And the debate was with Mondami, with Sliwa, and with Cuomo. And while it was going on, it was a 2-hour debate, we would stop it and make comments about what we had seen and our take on how it was going.
Right.
The performance of the moderators and the questioners, the response of the candidates to the question, how they were interacting. And we did that. Then at the end of that 2 hours, we then put another hour doing a critique of the whole debate. So I was wondering if you listened to it, what your thoughts were about that. I know you had to go to the Al Smith dinner. Did you have an opportunity to read about it or listen to it later on?
Well, I was at the Al Smith dinner, and I was sitting 2 blocks away from the owner-operator of this company, John Katzimatidis, and it was almost as if we were kids at an assembly in school. So we're trying to get information from wherever we could get it. And it was amusing just going through this. And by the way, I thought that the people who ran the dinner were quite fair with us. That they let us chatter a little bit. But there certainly was a feeling that I had that we talked about in the program we did, meaning you and myself and Rita and John, along with Chairman Cox, that part of the problem is the way the questions are asked. And we interviewed Bill O'Reilly that evening, and he talked about what's the right way to ask the question to box the individual who you're interviewing. And I thought that segment that we had with him was brilliant. So I was thinking about it and did get yesterday morning a chance to hear some of it, and I could see how Governor Cuomo, he'd say these things about Mamdani, but he never really asked Mamdani to answer them. It was like he just put it all out there, and it was like a tray of cocktails, and Mamdani could pick what he wanted and leave what he didn't want. And I thought they let him get away with that. And I think that that's increasing the momentum that he has now with, less than almost 2 weeks to go before Election Day. I think that he was allowed to kind of slip and slide his way in and out of situations. And I thought he never got boxed. Now, he's a sharp guy, but when you're peddling the type of dangerous activity and some of the proposals that he has, somebody's got to figure out a way to box you.
Well, we had on our group, we had Dominic Carter, noted newsman, journalist.
Sure.
We had Rita Cosby. We had me. We had Craig Eaton, our good friend, a great lawyer and former Republican chair of Brooklyn. We had Rudy Washington, former deputy mayor under Rudy Giuliani.
Always a good guest.
We had Mike Sapacone, who ran for the United States Senate last year. So we had interesting people observing this. We all seemed to come to the same consensus, which is the moderators, the questioners, didn't do a good job of asking questions. They were rushing from question to question and not following up on the responses and not dealing with it. Because a lot of times it's not important to have 100 questions answered. It's important to have 20 questions answered and make sure they're the right questions substantively, and make sure you get a real answer, and don't let somebody bob and weave and play Muhammad Ali and rope-a-dope it when there's really some real points that had to be made. So that was the consensus of our group as we watched it.
And I assume
the failure of the moderators.
That the moderators were accused by Curtis Sliwa of shorting his time. And I know that he's third in the race and he only has 15% in the polls, but he did qualify. He was a Republican nominee. And I think in those debates, you have to split the time, not by what the polls say, but certainly by the worthiness of the candidates who've been sent there by their parties.
Well, that's well said. Look, as I said on the show, and I'll repeat for our audience today, this may well be the most important mayoral election we've had in my lifetime. Or at least certainly since I've been a voter, which is a long time. You have three people, all of which are going to have enormous responsibilities and enormous powers in very difficult times, who have to govern and help govern the greatest city in the world, the economic, cultural engine of the United States. You have a candidate who, to my mind, is flawed by character, by ideology, by bias, by inexperience, and he's the leading candidate. That's Mamdani. He's an avowed socialist.
He had actual quotes, not where somebody wrote what they thought he said, but actual quotes
exactly
from
right.
him, and wasn't challenged on them the way I thought he should have been.
And that's exactly, your point's well taken, and that's exactly how we felt about it. There was no follow-up properly. And there was no really good follow-up by the candidates against him. What I observed was as follows, that Curtis Sliwa was going after both of them, which of course is his prerogative. But the problem is that Mamdani has never really been touched, never really been challenged. Cuomo ran one of the worst campaigns ever in the Democratic primary because there's a lot of baggage that this kid Mamdani has as an Islamist, an apologist for terrorism and Hamas, supporter from the river to the sea and Intifada, which is violence against Jews. His father, professor at your alma mater, Columbia, has spoken and written that he believes people wearing suicide vests and blowing themselves up and killing other people, that's not to be condemned. That's just another form of legitimate warfare.
No, legitimate protest.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, nonsense. And nobody's challenged Mamdani on this. They didn't do it in the primary, and they're not doing it now. Neither Sliwa nor Cuomo really went after him on that. Nobody really went after him. Curtis tried about, you're promising people everything to get their votes, but you're not going to be able to deliver on this stuff because you neither have the power nor will the economics work to do it. You can't have free everything because there's not enough resources and revenues to do that. You can't have free everything because a lot of times there are constraints on the mayor about what he can do in that job.
Well, Governor Cuomo laid out the case against him, but he, in my opinion, did not confront him, and there's a difference.
I agree.
He said all the things that he thought he'd done wrong. So what did Mamdani do? He ignored them. And what did the governor do in response? Nothing. And
Curtis was so happy taking shots at Cuomo that he didn't go after Mamdani the way he should have.
Exactly. Well, we've come to the end of another left versus the right.
With two Democratic centrists.
Two Democratic centrists who actually managed to get along for a whole 60 minutes. Stay tuned for John Sterling. He can talk about what the Yankees are going to do during the winter off season. And the judge and I don't know what we're going to do, but thanks for joining us.
The Left versus the Right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.